the in-group will do all it can to stay in power. And that's what you got to keep in mind. They'll use the Army and Navy and lies or whatever they have to use to keep in power. They're not about to give it up because they don't know of any other system that will perpetuate their kind.
Hey everybody, Jason Bermas here with a very special punk rock politics movie review. Now, for the past couple weeks, I've been getting a lot of emails and posts on my Facebook, basically asking me what I thought of the latest Zeitgeist film, Zeitgeist Moving Forward. And I think I got around to watching the entire thing about a week ago. I've went back and watched certain sections again, and I just want people to know right off the bat that this is not going to be a hate piece. What this is going to be is an in-depth review of the 2-hour and 40-minute plus film by Peter Joseph. And right off the bat, I want to say, wow on the production value. It looked amazing. One of the things that impressed me the most with this film is the fact that it had almost Disney-like style 2D animation. The animator that he used for telling Jacques Fresco's story in the beginning, and some of the war scenes, and even the scene of the Earth and the Sun later on were very impressive, very well done. This guy's a very talented filmmaker. He utilized a green screen very well, using groups of people and putting them in cityscape scenes, being very artistic, impressed with the sepia tones, knows how to speed up and slow down a film to give it dramatic effect. Just really excellent, and my hat's off to Peter Joseph, because by far out of the 3 major films that he has produced, Zeitgeist, Zeitgeist Addendum, and now Zeitgeist Moving Forward, this is by far the most visually stunning. And for an almost 3-hour movie, it's also very well paced. Now, the film begins with Fresco telling his story, and one of the things he starts off with is that he did not want to say the Pledge of Allegiance in class, and he wanted to pledge allegiance to the world. Now, I know I'm going to catch a lot of flack from some people because I have the American flag behind me, and to me, the American flag represents a populace which was ready to rise up against tyranny, and did so successfully, and put in a constitutional republic, a system of checks and balances, a redress of grievances, a government for and by the people. And although that system is clearly not what it used to be at all, and I believe our forefathers would be rolling over in their graves if they saw what a national security society we've built out of their best of intentions, if you will. That's what this flag means to me. I don't think that this is a representation of jingoism or nationalism or really even patriotism. I believe that one day we can have a system, once again, of checks and balances where we do prosecute the guilty. Now, during the rather impressive animation intro with Jacques Fresco, he makes the point, one in which I agree with, that if we were to take all the money that we spent on those wars, we would have been able to house and clothe and medically take care of the entire world's population all the way over. But why didn't that happen? Well, it didn't happen because you had a small group of individuals funding both sides of the war for a consolidation of power. And this harkens back to the introductory statement that we used in the intro of this and what you've seen in the trailer, where Fresco again states that the in-group will use whatever means necessary, lies, the Navy, the military, to stay in power because they don't know another way to perpetuate their kind. And I would challenge Mr. Fresco and the Zeitgeist movement in general for you to realize that their kind is a predator class. And unfortunately, it's part of human nature. I believe, and let's get in to, the next section of the movie, the nature versus nurture argument, which they make out to be a fallacious one. And I'm not so sure that that argument is actually fallacious. They make a strong argument for an individual who has been nurtured and taken care of and paid attention to, that they, of course, will, succeed more, have a better life. And I think that argument is true. Again, we're in agreement in this. For instance, they make the observation that if a baby isn't actually physically held when it's born and it's just left alone, it will die because it doesn't have that nurture. But isn't that a part of nature? Doesn't a mother naturally feel for her young and to take care of them? Isn't that part of human instinct? So again, they make the argument that, if you're in a better socioeconomic area, you're probably going to make more money, and then they show the ghettos. And again, we're in agreement as to that as well. However, what they don't take into consideration, in my opinion, is again the anomaly. And what is the anomaly? Okay, let's look at a family of 3 children. Now, these 3 children are born and raised in the same exact environment. Okay, their parents, both in the middle class. One has their own company, the other one is a teacher, and 2 out of the 3 of these children, one of the boys, one of the girls, they have a good job, or they are attending college with honors, and they're able to maintain a family. But 1 out of the 3 is constantly in trouble with the law, being arrested, addicted to drugs. That's a real situation. I'm going by people I actually know. I'm not going to name names, but they had every advantage growing up, and for some reason 2 of the 3 children decided to take those advantages and become a part of society, a functioning part, a moral part, one in which they help out their neighbor, they are generally a good person. And then somebody who lives this rather decadent, self-centered, sociopathic lifestyle. Why is that? They had the same parents, they had the same advantages growing up. Now let's take a look at the other extreme, for instance. Let's look at another family of 3, 2 boys, 1 girl. And you look at them after they've grown up and they were part of a destructive environment, their father in and out of jail, deaths in the family, being on welfare, and 2 of the 3 of them can't maintain a job, have children out of wedlock, are on social services, but 1 of the 3 of them is able to make it in the world, pay the bills, has their own place, has a steady job, is part of the middle class of society. Now again, you would argue that the statistics show you that yes, if there is more nurture there, they will do better, which I think is correct. But again, you're not accounting for the anomaly. I also want to give this example out there as well. Physical appearance makes a huge difference in things in this world that we live in. How so? Well, if you're good looking by society standards, whether you're a male or a female, you understand that things eventually come easier to you because the other person on the other end either wants to be with you sexually or they want to hang out with you because the other sex is always paying attention to you. That's a fact of life. And I've seen those people more often than not become manipulative. Another part of human nature. Not everybody out there is a great person. And I think all of us, to some extent, are extremely fallible. After all, we're human beings. We, in my opinion, at this point, cannot achieve perfection. Now, a lot of you are probably going to argue that I'm being ultra superficial when I dare to state how somebody looks matters in society, but it's just a fact of life. I mean, we all had that cheerleader in high school who ended up being the queen of the prom, and no matter how dorky you were, or how much she wouldn't pay attention to you, if she had asked you to do something, you would have jumped to the moon for her. Okay, that again is another part of human nature, and people pick up on those things. So again, I think that's another fallible argument in this film. And let's move on. Now, one of the things that was rather upsetting to me about this movie is that they don't really tell you how we are going to take this society back from those who have spent so much time consolidating power. And they also mention how culturally diverse the entire planet is. Again, another observation I agree with 100%. Look how culturally diverse we are just in the United States alone. Okay, let's just look at America. We have, Mexicans, we have Italians, we have Chinese. I mean, you go into New York City and it's the ultra melting pot, and you get to see it firsthand there. But for instance, I lived, while I was going in middle school and high school, amongst the Amish. And the Amish are also an example in this film, a short example of how communities can work together. But even in that community, I can assure you there is a social hierarchy. And civilizations, no matter which one we're talking about, whether it's 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, have always had a social hierarchy. And how is it that this society isn't going to have one? Who's going to make the decisions? Who's going to go out and do this survey that the film discusses? How are we going to, who's going to be in charge of surveying all the resources, and then how do we know that they're going to be honest with the rest of the population? I think that's another fallacious argument in all of this. Who do we give that power to? So again, we've never had a society in which we haven't had a social hierarchy of any kind. It's always been there. It's in our society today. Do I think it's a good thing? No. But do I think it's a thing that will naturally go away if we just stop spending money? Which seems to be the overall argument of this is we all need to take our money and go just dump it down on the streets of Wall Street or wherever and just stop using it. But I don't know how that is going to stop the other mechanisms of, again, this in-group that Jacques Fresco talks about. And I assure you, there is an in-group. And that's why I want to get to my next point here. There's a part about 2 hours and 10 minutes, 11 minutes, I don't know, the section right after Rise, which is section 4 of the film, where he begins to discuss one of these cities, I guess, with one of Jacques Fresco's models. And again, some of these city ideas I think are great. I would love to use some of the technology out there. If anybody has followed my radio show, you'll know that they show a car in this film that has been printed by one of these 3D printers. No longer do we have the days where we can just print out a visual flat picture, but now we have printers that actually build things, and in respects may be advanced enough soon to print themselves. So you would have an unlimited amount of these printing machines that again just keep printing digitally 3D models. And I covered the Irby, and they show the Irby in this film, and it's not the greatest car in the world. It's probably a little bit smaller and futuristic, kind of like a Bug, very aerodynamic. But the fact that this was printed by a 3D printer just shows you how we could really help the entire world technologically. And again, that's something I would love to do, absolutely. But in the beginning of this section, they take a cut at, I guess, anybody that would disagree with the system, whether or not they wanted to compare it to communism or Marxism or the New World Order, which apparently doesn't exist. Now, I want to say this. My last film is called Invisible Empire, A New World Order Defined. And what I tried to do in this film was take people in their own words and show what a new world order meant to them. And across the spectrum, I think that to certain people it does mean certain things. It does mean the succession of one world order to the next world order, and where we geopolitically relate to in society. But on the other hand, it has been talked about not only by H.G. Wells, but by Samuel Zane Batten about, I believe, 50 to 60 years before Wells put out his book, The New World Order, as a collectivist society. And that is what we're discussing about in this film. Now, in Batten's work, it is a Christian-based collectivist society. But right now, I want to show you a section of my film, Invisible Empire, where we discuss this version of the New World Order.
The first in-depth publication of note was Samuel Zane Batten's work, The New World Order, which was published in 1919. Under the cloak of Christianity, this order speaks of a new world rising and advocates social control over all people and all resources. It promotes a world federation with a world parliament, an international court, and a global police force. Some of its goals are as follows. Community. The danger and loss in crime and degeneracy. The determination to make community life safe, sanitary, wholesome, and moral. Industrial. The disappearance of class distinctions and the solidarity of all interests in the economic process. National. The conception of the nation's welfare as the supreme concern, with the policy that everything shall contribute to this end, and every person must do some useful work. International. The creation of an international mind, with a world consciousness and a world patriotism. The destruction of every arbitrary power that can separately and of its single choice disturb the peace of the world.
Illustrates that Samuel Zane Batten had a vision of a new world order, and it was of a collectivist society. Now, I've seen an interview, which we're going to play a clip from right here, of Peter Joseph being asked about the black helicopter crowd, as if Black Hawks and Apaches don't exist, I guess, and the New World Order. And he incorrectly states that this all began with H.G. Wells, and people have misinterpreted his words and turned it into some kind of a eugenics statement. And by the way, this film makes an early anti-eugenic stance, which I, again, happen to agree with. They point out that although our DNA may have predispositions for certain things, we can certainly overcome them as humanity. So I want to play this clip of Peter Joseph talking about H.G. Wells and the New World Order.
So how do you talk to the people who talk about black helicopters and the one world government and all of that? That fears about you can't let there be a global system because, according to this fear set.
The level of I can't think of a word to describe the ignorance and mind lock and religious faith and fear that people have of the world trying to work together, and that somehow you're going to end up with a grand world dictator that has everyone on leather leashes.
That's the Pope.
and it blows my mind. I get emails about this all the time, and if anyone's familiar with the feedback of Zeitgeist Addendum, there have been media critics that have brought this up as though we're advocating some kind of new tyrannical one world government. You might remember in the early editions of Zeitgeist the movie, I talk about how the banking system had been planning on making a unified banking orientation, which is essentially one world government, because government really is the movement of money. And they already have this. Sure. It's been around, and it's called the New World Order. But that label is contrived. The New World Order definition has changed throughout time. It was first introduced by H.G. Wells in his book, The New World Order, which was actually a positive book that was completely misinterpreted by people that thought he was talking about eugenics and controlling people and microchipping them and all of these things that were basically invented out of thin air with regards to what his intentions were. And then it got morphed, and then it got used by different famous personalities throughout time.
Trickle down.
And then now we have this psychotic, weird group of religious fanatics, not necessarily of a Christian or anything. They're religious in their blind view of this fear. And that's a big problem. I don't know what to say when I want, because you can't rationalize.
You can't rationalize.
Okay, now I'd like to play a clip from my film, which is Invisible Empire, A New World Order Defined, where we show you the quote where Mr. Wells talks about bringing in this New World Order, again, another collectivist society, slightly different from Batten's version of one. This one isn't a society of one world Christian religion. This is much different. But he says that many beautiful and gallant people will die fighting the New World Order. Now, I suppose some would argue that he meant they will spend their whole lives trying to basically stop this one world global society, but ultimately fail. However, it also suggests, because anytime someone has actually tried to bring in a one world government society or basically try to take over other nations, it ends in some sort of a genocide. And that's why after this section with H.G. Wells, we're going to show you how Hitler also envisioned a new world order.
Author H.G. Wells, the man behind The Time Machine and War of the Worlds, would write about a planned world state in which there must be a common faith and law for mankind. In 1939, he would publish a full book on the matter called The New World Order. Wells again has a similar vision, stating that national individualism has to go and that sovereign states must end. He then goes on to write, in the great struggle to evoke westernized world socialism, contemporary governments may vanish. Perhaps his most chilling prediction is that countless people will hate the New World Order, be rendered unhappy by frustration and their passions and ambitions through its advent, and will die protesting against it. Many of them quite gallant and graceful-looking people.
Collectivism is that concept where individuals are considered to be discardable, and that the group is more important, and that the ultimate group, of course, is the state. And so it boils down eventually to the fact that the state is the all-important unit of society, and citizens exist only to serve the state. Well, government is good, right? It put an end to war. Well, it could put an end to war because you just only have one dictator. I think Adolf Hitler had that in mind. He wanted a world government too, with himself as the master leader.
Many have regarded Hitler as the apex of evil, a true heart of darkness. But how many people know that Hitler had his own vision of a new world order? Hitler had been promoted by the establishment. He graced the cover of Time magazine many times and was their Man of the Year twice. His vision was simple: unify Europe and then the world. The only real difference was that his order was racially motivated, instead of being based solely on religion. He even wrote a lesser-known follow-up to Mein Kampf in 1928 that many have dubbed My Order, or New World Order. President Roosevelt would condemn this order prior to World War II.
Nazi forces openly seek to establish systems of government based on the regimentation of all human beings by a handful of individual rulers who seize power by force. Yes, these men and their hypnotized followers call this a new order. It is not new, and it is not order.
The idea of globalization was so prominent in Nazi ideology that the 1936 Berlin Games would be the first time that the Olympic rings would be displayed prominently and promoted in order to glorify the Third Reich. This symbol represents the 5 major regions of the world: Africa, America, Asia, Europe, and Oceania, interlocking and coming together as one. This one world philosophy still defines the Olympic Games today.
Australia, hello and welcome. One world, one dream.
Hitler's methods of youth corps, concentration camps, eugenics, and military aggression were so visible to the rest of the world, he eventually failed. However, his vision of a new world order lived on.
Moving on a bit from the subject of the New World Order, if you want to see literally hundreds of politicians, giants of corporations, and policymakers discuss what they think it means to them, please go check out Invisible Empire, A New World Order, to find free on YouTube. It's got around 1.2 million hits right now just on Change the Channel alone, and I'm trying to have people look at all the information. I want people to check out the Zeitgeist films. I think they're good films. I just don't happen to agree with all of them. When George Bush, for instance, discusses a new world order under the United Nations, doesn't that say that the United Nations may have some role in this globalist society, may be that next step?
Bush would actually make a commencement address at Maxwell Air Force Base declaring the birth of this order.
And that's why I wanted to speak to you today about the new world taking shape around us, about the prospects for a new world order now within our reach. In the coming weeks, I'll be talking in some detail about the possibility of a new world order emerging after the Cold War. But today, I want to discuss another aspect of that order. You see, as the Cold War drew to an end, we saw the possibilities of a new order in which nations work together. It refers to new ways of working with other nations to deter aggression and to achieve stability. As old threats recede, new threats emerge. The quest for the new world order is in part a challenge to keep the dangers of disorder at bay. We must build on the successes of Desert Storm to give new shape and momentum to this new world order. Only when this transformation is complete will we be able to take full measure of the opportunities presented by this new and evolving world order. The new world order really is a tool for addressing a new world of possibilities. This order gains its mission and shape not just from shared interests, but from shared ideals.
And I really have to show just one more section of the movie because, again, in Zeitgeist Addendum, they make fun of those who think that a secret cabal of anybody rule the world. Well, unfortunately, this is the case. They don't necessarily all believe the same things religiously or politically or morally, but when a vast majority of this very small elite who have consolidated power over the last few hundred years are not only meeting in secret in places like the Bohemian Grove and the Bilderberg Group, both factual, it is rather bizarre to me that it's occultic. And right next to me, I have in my hands a couple of the Bohemian Grove Annals. Now this one right here is a volume 4, and I believe this one right here is just about 90 years old and covers, you know, between, I want to say the late 1800s into 1930, but one of the plays that they have right here is involving Mephisto, and it's Faust, and another one of the plays that they do, let's see if we can find the picture right here, is one of human sacrifice and the Mayan culture. Not to mention them being cross-dressers. You want to take a look right there. You know, this is one of the older ones. And I've studied the Bohemian Grove, and although it was started by artisans, here's the Centennial Edition. This is volume 5 right here, just to give you an idea. And, you know, some of the things they're into for people who swear up and down that they're Christian conservatives, and I'm not a Christian conservative, I just see the hypocrisy in not only their actions but their behaviors, and they're getting the vast majority of their funding from people who I don't think would give them their funding if they weren't so naive and ignorant. So I do want to show you that indeed people that are in very high places of power, financially, politically, part of that military-industrial complex that we also discuss in that film, are also into the occult. So here's yet another section from Invisible Empire.
So is there anything else about the ruling class we should know? Politicians, business leaders, and media figures are often portrayed as pillars of morality while they describe themselves as Christian conservatives. Nothing could be further from the truth. In reality, many of the elite are groomed at a young age to take part in occult rituals. Those who attend Yale are indoctrinated into the Order of Skull and Bones, an elite secret society cloaked as a fraternal order.
Yale University is 300 years old this year, and were you to visit its campus, you would see that it still has exotic clubhouses, which look like tombs where Yale's legendary secret societies meet. Their prestige and importance have largely evaporated, but the rituals are still a secret. And so when we heard that some enterprising characters had managed to spy on the famous Skull and Bones Society, we couldn't resist.
Skull and Bones, people say it's a fraternity at Yale University, but it's really a postgraduate organization. So it was founded in 1832, and it's not like a normal fraternity. People don't pledge. These people choose who they want to come. So they do the recruiting. They recruit 15 people every year, people who they see are going to be powerful people in the future. So they're recruited when they're a junior in college. A lot of these people come from really wealthy and influential families because they know that this person has the resources to then elevate them to a position of power that can benefit the club.
The video shows the neophytes, or initiates, kissing a skull, then performing a mock human sacrifice. Horrific screams caught on tape include chants of, "The devil equals death, death equals the devil."
True. Famous alums include Senators John Kerry and John Chafee, to name two, cabinet secretaries such as Averell Harriman, and 3 presidents, William Taft, George Bush, and George W. Bush, who's been reluctant to talk about Skull and Bones.
Does it still exist? The thing is so secret, I'm not even sure it still exists.
Former Skull and Bones members and current members have been presidents, heads of the CIA, senators, heads of business. I mean, huge, huge corporations. These people have the network that brings them to such a position of power that most people could only dream of.
Bush would run against his fellow Bonesman and distant cousin John Kerry in 2004.
You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us? Not much, because it's a secret. Is there a secret handshake? Is there a secret code? I wish there were something secret I could manifest. 322, a secret number? There are all kinds of secrets, Tim.
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go wild.
I'm sure they are. I don't know. I haven't seen the web.
Number 322?
This is an elaborate, occult, ritualistic entry into this group that they are now a member of for life.
This culture of death in the occult continues long after college. Later on in life, these pagan rituals carry on in the redwoods of Sonoma, California.
And what is the Bohemian Grove? Well, it's a kind of summer camp for the powerful, an all-male gathering in great secrecy.
This group was formed in the late 1800s by artists, industrialists, and politicians. Bohemian attendees worship the owl as their deity. The Aztecs, Mayans, and other natives of Mesoamerica considered the owl a symbol of destruction and death. This is why the opening ritual for the club is the Cremation of Care. During the ritual, the effigy of a baby is rowed across the water by the Grim Reaper and given to a high priest, who then tosses it on a fiery sacrificial altar of a 40-foot owl god. It is an earth-based ritual in which care is burned away. The conscience is symbolically cast aside so that they may ignore the pain they have inflicted on others for the advancement of their own agendas.
With this ceremony called the Cremation of Care, that begins the 2-week encampment where the body of dull care, symbolizing woes and concerns, is burned on an altar in front of a big owl statue. When that ceremony ends, they all start to cheer and yell.
You have to ask yourself why it is that somebody would want to do that, let alone these elite people. And if you look at the elite throughout history, many of the people that achieve pinnacles of power are into the occult. They seek a supernatural way to gain power.
Why are Christian conservatives such as the Bushes and Newt Gingrich attending the Grove?
And I recognize I'm not going to be invited to Renaissance Weekend.
Or that Bohemian deal where Newt, Rush, and Dick all sit in a teepee, naked, beating on tom-toms.
Why does the media barely mention the Grove? Because many of them are in attendance. Late political cartoonist Phil Frank of the San Francisco Chronicle draws a reporter thinking about his loyalties to Bohemian Grove as he takes notes for a story.
Stories about what happens in these redwoods are hard to come by. A campground statue reminds Bohemians to keep their mouths shut about the Grove.
Many world events have been shaped at the Grove, including the creation of the atomic bomb.
Discussions at the Grove in the 1930s helped lead to the development of nuclear power and the atomic bomb.
Every Republican president since Calvin Coolidge has been a member, as well as many Democrats, including Jimmy Carter.
If you look at the membership lists of the Bohemian Grove and the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg Group, a lot of the key level people are overlapping and are involved in numerous groups.
In addition to pagan rituals that take place there, this all-male club also deals with darker themes through the plays Montezuma, which feature Aztec human sacrifice, and Faust, which feature Mephisto. Some of these plays are disturbingly flamboyant. Many of the elitists have a penchant for cross-dressing and singing show tunes.
Now, moving on to yet another section of the film that I have to respectfully disagree with is the fact that it promotes climate change and man-made global warming. Now, again, I'm not one of those people that say that the Earth doesn't have some sort of climate change going on. I think that the Earth is constantly changing, and that is really the only constant that the Earth has. When I was a child, they taught me in school that it was chlorofluorocarbons and hairspray and spray paint were basically ruining the ozone layer, and that's why we had global warming. And now it has makeshifted itself into man-made climate change and the overproduction of carbon dioxide. Now, anybody out there that took basic science as a child also knows that carbon dioxide is the life force of plant life here on Earth. So that just doesn't jive with me thinking about it. But then we had ClimateGate in this country. And again, we illustrate this in my latest film, and we're just going to roll some of that right now, where you can see the private emails between the two top United Nations scientists out there admitting that we have not had climate change for over a decade. That's right, we haven't had global warming in over a decade, and I believe that this is just more evidence that they're being fallacious with their arguments. Now, anybody who followed my radio show also knows about the Copenhagen Climate Conference and how they tried to get this basically international treaty passed in which they would set up an organization for you to pay carbon taxes to. And your carbon taxes would be based on how many cars you drove, how many children you had, how much land you owned, how much energy you used each year, and it would be yet another additional tax on your life, aka taxing you for breathing, literally. And that's where I've seen this climate change movement going to. Do I think that we need to take care of the Earth? Absolutely. There are real things going on to this Earth, real pollutants being put into the water, real regulations being broken, real problems with genetic foods in this country and in the world. Those are real issues that we do need to do something about. But this idea that carbon dioxide is the problem is simply laughable, folks. I encourage you to read the ClimateGate emails yourself and not just believe Jason Bermas or what the mainstream media or even the alternative media had to say about this situation. Folks, they were literally taking photographs from people who were mountain climbing and saying that this was evidence that the ice caps were melting. They did no science whatsoever. And it blows my mind that more people aren't aware of what went down during ClimateGate and this Copenhagen conference. And that brings me to my next point. Peak oil is pushed in this movie by a man named Michael Rupert. And remember, they want this survey, and we don't know who's going to do this survey of all the natural resources on the planet, scientifically done, which I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to. But again, who's going to do this survey for us, and how do we know they're going to be straight and honest with us once it's actually done? But we do this survey, and we find out how much oil's left. Now, the peak oil theory is we've already hit peak oil, and they're not telling us, and basically we're going to run out of oil and chaos is going to ensnare the world. Now, I'm just going to say this about this. Anybody who's read The Energy Non-Crisis knows again that this is a fallacious argument, that there is plenty of oil, that they have kept some of these reserves down because they don't want, basically we have a supply and demand system. If there's too much of a supply, the people who control the oil, Standard Oil and others, again, how are we going to get these people to give up their power, decide what they're going to set the price at, how many refineries are open, how many oil fields are being mined, and what the process is there. And they don't want us to have $50 a barrel oil or $40 or $25 a barrel oil. They want 100, 150, 200s and upwards so they can maximize profits. And I suppose this does make a good argument for a separate type of monetary system. And I'm in agreement with that also. I think that the type of monetary system we have right now, the type of checks and balances that really doesn't prosecute criminals that behave like this, is a huge issue. But again, I'm not sold on this idea of peak oil and a resource-based economy, especially because, again, you have someone like Michael Rupert promoting it. Now, this is all I'm going to say about Rupert. I enjoyed parts of Collapse. I thought it was very good. I even briefly met him this September 11th down in New York City during a speech that some of these guys and panels that were going on over at INN. And Rupert maliciously attacked me and the other creators of Loose Change in the New York Times and other places, saying that our film was CIA disinformation. In his expert opinion, the kind astute to only Peter Dale Scott, where 90% of the information was correct, but 10 was purposely put in there to dissuade people from looking into the truth. Now, again, anybody familiar with my work knows that not only have I had Peter Dale Scott on my radio program, but he's also one of the featured intellectuals in my latest film, Invisible Empire, A New World Order Defined. I love Peter Dale Scott's work. I've had dinner with the man. I think he's great. I saw him down in New York City also and shook his hand. But my big problem is, how would Rupert know that we were CIA disinformation? He never emailed us. He never called us. He never tried to contact us in any way. We were extremely available. And I, for one, would have loved to discuss some of his research with him, as The Truth and Lies of 9/11, a PowerPoint presentation he put on the internet, was one of the first things I saw and one of the most interesting things I had seen on 9/11 truth up until that point. The bottom line is, did we make mistakes in those films? I would say that, it was 3 people looking at the evidence. We're human beings. How could we get everything 100% right when all we're asking people to do is look at this evidence and ask yourself why we don't have a real independent investigation to the anomalies that we're presenting in these films? What does the evidence really point towards? But again, you just have somebody attacking us without trying to contact us. And that's more than upsetting. Now, my last major critique of the film Zeitgeist moving forward is that it doesn't seem to allow for any argument that there could be some type of intelligent design on this planet and across the universe. It basically argues that macro evolution is indeed fact without really even having to make that argument. And anybody who doesn't agree with that is simply wrong. Now, science changes all the time, and to think that we have all the answers and keys to the universe at this point, I think is being more than naive. And I want to state right now, I absolutely believe in microevolution. For instance, just look at human beings. Europeans are white. Why? Because there's not as much sunlight there. It rains a lot. African Americans, or Africans in general, are dark because the sun shines there all the time. We have weather in the United States, so Native Americans were brown. It's hotter in the southern regions in Mexico, and that's why those people are browner yet than even Native Americans. There's a reason that people look a certain way in the Pacific Island region. That is an example of microevolution, or evolution within a species. But I don't necessarily believe in macroevolution, which is species to species evolution. I really haven't seen the evidence there, and that doesn't mean that I'm a Christian or a Muslim, or I believe in God. I may believe that, you know, there is a lot out there, and if there is a God and there is a possibility of intelligent design, and I think that this possibility is illustrated rather well in a film by Ben Stein called No Intelligence Allowed. I can't recommend that film enough. I actually think that film is rather excellent. It looks at it in a unique perspective, a non-religious perspective really, and that's what I'm trying to do. And to take this argument out of the equation automatically means that everybody who believes in a higher power or is involved in some kind of an organized religion is completely wrong, without really having to make any arguments whatsoever. So how do we move forward into this society, which I guess would have to be an atheist one kind of presented in the first Zeitgeist film, where just all religion is eradicated, when you do have, you know, over 1 billion Muslims, when you do have a large member of Christians or people who are Jewish and other religions out there? How do you get rid of that stuff, or deny that religion has a place in society whatsoever? Wouldn't that have to be done violently at some point? Not everybody is just going to go along with the flow, and that's another thing that I think we have to look at with this Zeitgeist movement. Now, I hope you guys have enjoyed this review. I hope you realize this is not a hateful review. I think that Peter Joseph, again, is a very talented filmmaker. I think the production value on this film is amazing. I suggest people go out and check it. I think that a lot of the arguments are good ones. Absolutely. I think that we do need to change the system the way it is now. However, I believe that the way to do that is through the levers and gears that are in place via Congress and the Senate and local government and freedom of speech while we still have it. Because again, this movie doesn't really address the fact that we have a society that's moving forward into this big brother elite control grid. And that's what I see. And that's what my research shows. So I just want to say I got nothing but love for you Zeitgeisters out there. I hope you got all the way through the review. I hope you check out my work. And I am more than willing to hear counter arguments and how we are going to be able to implement these things. I hope that I don't get a ton of hate mail, because this isn't a hateful thing I'm trying to put forth. You can check me out over at facebook.com/Jason Bermas, or you can check out my YouTube channel at youtube.com/JasonJustice911. I love y'all.